All right, I'm going to go ahead and start because I need like every minute of the next 25 to get this done. My name's Steve Hutchinson. I'm the principal identity architect for GE Digital, and I'm going to be talking about our identity team's journey from a kind of typical enterprise level IT team to part of what has been GE's transformation from industrial to digital industrial company and what that's meant for our organization. I also want to bring you greetings today from General Electric's legal department. That requires me to say that the views and opinions expressed in my presentation are my own and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the General Electric company or any of its subsidiaries. So I'll remove that little logo there in the corner. And I'm going to be referring to a generic enterprise. I might use their initials, but honestly, as I'm going through and talking about it, it could be any company founded by a famous inventor that's got 500,000 employees and is the world's leader in innovations in the industrial space. I also, the last time I spoke at the Cloud Identity Summit was back in 2014, and I put this slide up, which was kind of a warning about elevated expectations, which I think turned out to be a little bit too pessimistic based on what's happened to us over the last few years. Part of what I said then is true, however, which was that you should be using this event to let you help inform the vision for whatever your organization is, because a vision that's built on expert knowledge is a really powerful tool, and you're going to be hard-pressed to find better experts in the identity space than you're going to find here at the Cloud Identity Summit. So make sure that you actually take the time to build your network, engage the people who you find interesting, follow those people on Twitter, join some of the organizations that you'll see represented, the OpenID Foundation, Kantara, join the ID Pro group. Just make sure that you don't let your experience stop here. Make sure that you let it inform your decisions as you go through. The other slide I presented in 2014 was this one, which at the time I was really proud of because I was going to wow people with how all the numbers and everything that are in here, because one thing we've got at GE is scale, but it's only now, years later, looking back on it, I realize how rigid our system was, how many of the services that we take for granted today we lacked at the time, and how much we've actually grown. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So what are the big things that's changed? Well, we've actually gone through a huge leadership change. Again, we've moved from a standard IT org to what we call a digital technology organization. In addition to new leadership, we've got a really strong partnership now with both our IT risk organization and our cybersecurity organization, who have recognized that identity is one of the things that is most important to their programs, and it's through our standard identity services that they can embed the controls that they need to make sure that we meet all the compliance and regulatory requirements that we have as a global company. We took the identity program and we established 8 different program areas, and I'm not going to go through them all here, but if you look at them, I mean, none of these should be too dissimilar for you, because when we went through and tried to figure out how we were going to reorganize our group, we met with Gartner and Forrester, and we met with a lot of our larger vendors. We worked with people who we greatly respect in the identity industry, and all of them had very similar structures. So this is what we've chosen to adopt. So this is kind of what our identity platform looks like now. And so our services are now delivered as products. The services, in a large part, can be self-provisioned and consumed with standard interfaces. Each team that was one of those 8 teams developed their own product roadmap, but we all follow kind of unified guiding principles and we all agree to support corporate strategy initiatives that we all agree to provide our resources for. So even though each team has got its own set of sprints and its own set of resources, we also have a scrum of scrum, a sprint of sprints, where we all get together and we agree to horse trade on resources so that we can support the larger initiatives that GE and the GE digital business have. So what are those things that are driving our strategy? And this is what I'm going to be talking about in our presentation. And they really almost go from the top down. One of the biggest things, of course, is the industrial Internet of Things, which is, I'll explain, is a little bit different than the consumer Internet of Things. Full adoption of industry identity standards, stronger partnership with not just our developers, but also with our business teams. Our corporate network is now becoming the public internet, and we're moving to contextual risk-based authentication and a greater emphasis on improved service in our external identity management. So I'm going to start with the industrial Internet of Things, which is the biggest transformation that GE has gone to. And the reason for that is I'm just going to go through a couple of things to give you, again, a sense of scale. I like the numbers. Again, GE, of course, is one of the largest companies in the world. We had $120 billion in revenue last year. We have over 400,000 employees that operate in over 180 countries. We build jet engines, we build turbines, MRI, marine equipment, locomotives. You know, if it's a piece of industrial equipment, odds are that we're building it somewhere. We like to think of ourselves as one team, but we're actually 10 different businesses, each one of those businesses focused on a specific industry or vertical. We have $1 trillion in assets that are deployed worldwide, and it's that industrial legacy that we've got that's been a foundation for the new digital industrial transformation. On those assets, we monitor on a typical day 50 million different data points. We've got 10,000 turbines, 65,000 jet engines, and by 2020, we plan to have thousands of connected factories that are communicating to each other over the internet. And each one of these businesses can stand as an example of the transformation. I'm just going to focus on a couple of them before we move on. So for GE Aviation, our newest, most connected engines are our LEAP and CFM engines. And right now we have about 21,000 of those engines deployed to 450 different customers. What that means is generally 80% of all the aircraft that are in the air at any given time have got a GE engine on them. On a typical cross-country flight, each one of those engines is going to produce 300 gigabytes of data. There's usually 2 engines on a plane multiplied by the number of planes that are in the air, and you get a sense of how much data is actually being generated. From all of our systems that are on the plane, just beyond the engines, it results in about a terabyte of data on a typical flight that's generated. Now that data had always been primarily for improvements in maintenance, making sure that parts were waiting at airports. Now we're using it primarily for fuel savings, as even like a 1% reduction in fuel consumption can result in millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars in fuel savings. But once we started to collect all that data, and once we found a place to put it, and once we started applying analytics to it, it opened up a whole bunch of other revenue options for us, which included things like logistics coordination, passenger movement, notifications, et cetera. Similarly, in our transportation business, which is locomotives and rail systems, our Tier 4 locomotives, which are our most fuel-efficient ones, each one of those engines carries over 200 sensors. They also generate gigabytes of data. What we've been able to do with that beyond, again, the predictive maintenance, which was always our bread and butter, we've been able to increase the speed of locomotives on an average of 1 mile an hour, and reduce the park time of those locomotives by about 1%. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, even those small sets of efficiencies generated over $4.7 billion in reduced operator costs for the customers. So that's a huge selling point for us. But it was only because we were able to start to wrangle that data. And to be able to do that effectively, we needed to have a really different approach to our computing. If you've followed me on Twitter or talked to me at a conference, I'd like to point out that consumer IoT is very different from industrial IoT. And while consumer IoT is a great test bed for a lot of these new technologies, and we've leveraged a lot of the lessons learned from consumer IoT, like everything as a service, cloud computing, compute capabilities on the edge, machine learning, and advances in security. The scale of the data and what we need to do with the data and the risks of not using the data properly are very different on the industrial side than they are on the consumer side. So we needed to build new systems. Now, we already had systems of record, things like ERPs, to do financials and things like that. We also had systems of engagement, which were our collaboration tools. What we were lacking was a system of assets. So we built something that we call Predix. And Predix isn't just a cloud-based development platform, although it is that. It's a distributed system for industrial IoT, because it's one thing to put sensors on machines and connect them, but it's an entirely different thing to try and manage all of that disparate data. So the platform's meant to do all of that heavy lifting and to help speed both development of new services and adoption of those services. So our program, our identity program now, is almost entirely geared to help supply those services in the same agile format that our new developers are expecting those services to be delivered. So one of the ways that we can provide agility is to provide those services in a way that leverages standards. So let me bring back up that awesome 2014 slide again. If you look at this, the bulk of the applications that we had at the time were in our web access management space, which was just an incredibly proprietary, tightly coupled, heavy system. One of the reasons why SAML grew so quickly, and in 2014, those 475 federations, 400 of those were in the previous 2 years. And the reason why it grew so quickly was because it was built on standards. It was easy for people to consume. And in 2014, we had just started to use OpenID Connect. And I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but right now we have about 2,500 SAML federations. We have over 2,000 OpenID Connect enabled applications. We have over 4,500 APIs that are protected by OAuth, and we're actually killing off the web access management, which has taken 16 years, but I'm going to stick around GE just to watch it happen. So let's look at Predix again really quickly. Everything is API enabled. It's a set of orchestrated services instead of monolithic applications. It's fluid development where services are delivered on the fly, and the developers need those services when and where they need them, not where we want to provide them on the timescale that we want to provide them. And again, standards make that happen. And adherence to standards doesn't just help the interconnectivity, although it does that, but you also get the benefits of functionality when new services are developed for those standards. Now, this is like the most beautiful slide I've ever seen in my entire life. Pam Dingle did this for a presentation back in April and was trying to figure out if she could fit all of the new standards work that was going on within the OpenID Foundation and the IATF on one slide, and by God, she did it. But the biggest thing is, again, once we decided to leverage and get all of our applications moving over to OpenID Connect, now we can start looking at things like doing session management in a standardized way instead of a proprietary way, being able to leverage things like single logout, to be able to do things that we couldn't, not only could we not do in a standard way before, but we couldn't do it all. So again, we're very excited about all of this. Now, if you want to know how you get your application teams to actually adopt all these things, so John Lentini, who's sitting right back over there, has a presentation on Wednesday at 10 o'clock, and John and his team of merry men have gotten these services so that they can be delivered via self-service. We've been able to reduce our contractor staff, and I don't want to steal any of John's thunder in the thing, but you want to see how many millions of dollars that John is saving GE by just implementing standards and the things that he's done to try and get those applications moved over. You don't want to miss that talk. So again, our partnership with the developers and the business team, it's required us to work a lot more closely with them. We need to get the requirements that we're using for our services aren't just from the business anymore, and it's not just from our expertise in the identity space. It's coming from the needs from those teams. So development teams actually teach us where we need to improve our services or even to provide new services to allow them to maintain that sense of agility and speed and efficiency they have. And the business teams teach us what our services can provide to allow them to reach new groups of customers, which is kind of an awesome place for the identity industry to be. If our service closes a compliance hole, which allows then our businesses to offer a service where they can operate in a space where they couldn't previously operate before, then now we're a business enabler, not just a cost center. And that's something that, if you ever heard Ian Glazer, I think it was a couple of years ago, did a talk on killing IAM in order to save it. And I love one of his sayings. He was talking about how great it was, to be a business enabler and to get out of that cost center role. So they said we need to be a part of those discussions and not a part from those discussions. But I've always remembered that one, so I wanted to include it. Next thing is that our corporate network is now the public internet, and I don't mean that we leverage the public internet to each other. I mean that the public internet is quickly replacing our corporate network as the primary means for communicating to applications, assets, and between offices. So this thing that people say, this was a GE thing. So I know it says 2013, but this was actually 2012, a talk that Daniel Hedrick gave, and I think you were talking about the SAND initiative, which at the time was talking about how we were segregating different parts of our network with increasing need of security as you went through and that part of that security was going to be based on your identity for the first time. So your identity was going to determine what you could get to within the network. What we've done now is we've pulled that up to cloud migration. I know cloud migration isn't anything that people here don't understand. I mean, we've all had to deal with our employees being able to access assets while they moved off the internet. And we've moved applications in the hosting infrastructure that those applications sit on. Again, that's nothing new to anybody. What has been different for us is that our CIO wants to move our office locations, where the employees sit and work during the day, and have those communicate not over the corporate network, but over the public internet. And then by 2020, as I said, we're going to put 5,000 factories are all going to communicate back to our hosting infrastructure, our application, into the other offices over the public internet, getting rid of the strong dependency on the corporate network. The only thing that's going to be left on the corporate network are probably going to be what we call our crown jewel applications. This is also going to require us to have move towards a more contextual or risk-based authentication program rather than the traditional ones that we used to have. And traditionally, this is what our authentication services look like. Authentication was a one-time event that generated a proprietary session cookie that we then tried to keep alive for a defined period of time. In our case, it was 10 hours. And why 10 hours? Because it was 10 hours. It was not based on risk. It was not based on compliance. It was, we needed a number, so our CTO came up with 10 hours. If an application wanted to do step-up authentication, they could do it on their own by calling the corporate two-factor authentication. Again, a decision an application team was making, again, not based on a dynamic risk profile. Now, the session cookie is incredibly fragile, and to make sure that it could last for 10 hours, we were doing a lot of kind of wonky things in our login service, and over a period of years, that generated 90,000 lines of code for our login form. Yeah. So what we're doing now instead of having this thing, we're doing what the development teams have taught us that they're doing in Predix, which is to break these things apart and start to take those, I'm sorry. Before we go there, so instead of identity's new parameter, we just want to make one small change to that, which is identity in context is the new parameter, because context is everything. We don't want to just keep a session alive for 10 hours. We want to keep a session alive as long as you need it alive, as long as your risk profile doesn't change. So to do that, we've built what we call an authentication bus, which is orchestrating a set of APIs, which are the same APIs that we're providing to application teams and our Predix developers that allow us to start to plug things in without having to go back and change a huge piece of code. So we can now plug new authenticators in. So if we decide that Windows Hello is a sufficient way for us to identify you, we can leverage your desktop login as something to identify you. This reduces our dependency on passwords and, again, allows us to plug these things in. One of the things on there is now a risk engine is going to be used to determine how long your session lasts. And that risk engine leverages a whole bunch of stuff about you, including the device profile, a lot of the geolocation data. We have one of the best CERT teams and cybersecurity teams in the world, and we want to leverage threat analytics that are being generated from that team as part of our risk calculations as we're going through. Regulatory compliance that are going to govern the type of data that the applications are using will help determine if you need to do step-up authentication. Time of day, we're starting to look into monitoring user behavior analytics to, again, all of this to build a risk profile for you. So if you're accessing the same applications from the same location in the same manner that you do every day, we may never authenticate you for days. Again, as long as we can trust it, it's only when your risk profile changes that we will either authenticate you again or require you to provide like another step-up authentication. Last thing is our external identity management program, and I promise this is the last time. Sorry. The worst thing you want to hear from your customer about your service is I'm disappointed. And that's actually not true. The worst thing you can hear from your customer is your service looks like it was created in Central Africa in 1993, which is an actual quote from one of our customers. Now I'm going to promise that this is the last time I bring this slide up. But up there in the corner where it says B2B, B2C, that was our legacy external identity service. And it was a poor user experience. It didn't support any of the modern integration standards. When I say it had inadequate lifecycle management is a huge understatement. There was no identity proofing that we provided centrally. We pushed all that down to the business, and the system didn't support any modification, to the point where it was built on legacy systems that were so old that we didn't have the code for them anymore. Nobody could find it. So again, we took all the stuff that we had been learning from our authentication service and we applied it to external identity management. So again, external identity management is now an orchestrated set of services that allows us to do all kinds of things that we greatly improved the user experience. Application owners can now self-service this to get their applications integrated with it, as well as our external users can self-register for those services. They're built on the same standard services and interfaces that everything else that we have is built on, so we were able to put in a whole bunch of reuse from the things that we had already done. It has full user lifecycle management that allows us to comply with all the regulatory requirements that we have. It's a modular design, which allows us to do things like make API calls to third-party identity proofing services that can give us a more full-featured thing. So instead of having, months and years go by before we drop users off, now we can, on each logon event, we can check to make sure that the user's still an employee of the company that they come from. And then we also build in the potential to integrate with other GE services, like other customer information management services that they have inside. So what's next for us? Probably the biggest thing now is we're looking into the identity of the industrial Internet of Things, or IoT. So whereas we used to be in the industrial IoT space, we were primarily focused on doing data management and security to protect the data that was produced by IoT devices. We now have the situation where machines are making decisions based on data that they're getting from other machines. So machines are acting like humans when they're going to retrieve data. And like that, we need to find a way to identify those machines. And we're working right now with standards that were developed in the 90s. And the biggest thing that we've been able to come up with so far is certificates. But we build really good industrial equipment. So this stuff is around for 50 and 60 years. And we don't have a lot of certificates with a 60-year lifespan on them. So we're super interested in the things that are going on, the Industrial Internet Consortium, the Open Systems Foundation. All of those groups are really looking at that space. And they've been focused primarily on building their security architecture, but they're just starting to get into those discussions. We're also looking at things like new standards like UMA 2.0, which we hope is going to help provide a standard way to do authorization in a way for our application teams and businesses to do their own policy management, which we used to provide with our central Terrible system, and then standard session management and those things. If you have any questions or you just want to chat, since I've used up all of our time, my contact information is here. I'm on Twitter. I'm happy to take phone calls. I've gotten a lot from the identity community, and I want to be able to give a lot back as well. So if you have questions, you can come up afterwards. Otherwise, I thank you for your time.